I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is an official Livingston Parish Ordinance Committee meeting today, Tuesday, March the 8th. The notices were all published, and so, Ms. Sandy, will you call the roll real quick to see if there's a quorum?
Yes, Mr. Wascom.
Here.
Mr. Girlinghouse. Mr. King. Mr. Mack.
Here. I spoke with Tracy and Mr. Scooter King, and both of those are not going to be here tonight. I just found this out. So what that means is that we do not have a quorum for an ordinance committee. However, as chairman, I would still like to proceed with it, have discussion just as we are in full ordinance committee. The only difference being that as a committee, we're not allowed to take action as a committee. But trust me, the discussion, your thoughts, your views will be recorded on the television, will be seen by the rest of the council. So the main action, I guess the most important thing that's valid would be the parish council. So we'll just continue with that. The first, just real quick, if you don't mind, just check your cell phones just to make sure we don't get interrupted too bad. The first item on the agenda is to discuss a master plan recommendations. Mr. Gerald Burns serves as the master review plan committee, and he had brought together to the parish an ordinance, and what it basically does, and we talked about it at the last ordinance committee meeting. Shane, you knew about it, I believe. Yeah. And what I'll do is give you just a quick synopsis of what it is. When the state tries to widen a highway, for instance, Florida Boulevard from Denham Springs all the way through the rest of the parish is just 2 lanes. Well, when you're coming from Baton Rouge, it's 4 lanes through Denham, and then it turns to 2. And so we've been trying for years to get Florida Boulevard widened, but businesses have located close to Florida Boulevard. And so when the state comes through to buy right away, they have to buy these businesses. And it winds up, the cost of the road winds up tripling the state, so they reluctant to do it. So had this ordinance been in place years ago, we could probably have gotten Florida Boulevard 4-lane sooner. But what we've done, and Mr. Gerald's worked really hard, and I'll read portions of it, but what we're doing is requiring further setbacks. If you have a building that's on a state highway or federal highway, then you're required to set back 35 feet. I believe, is that what, 30? 30 feet back. And then that way, in the future, if the state comes through and wants to widen, they don't have to purchase a person's building. And you know, we had a little bit of pushback, and I understand people won't have property rights and you want to develop all of your property, but when traffic is a major issue in this parish, and so by implementing this, for any future development, if your property or your business or building is going to be on state highway, you have to set back 30, and I think the current setback is what, 25? There is no set. I thought there was. The parish has a setback.
It's an internal subdivision ordinance,
Okay, and so that's what this is. I'll just read you a couple things that Gerald Burns put together with Miss Sandy to put together this ordinance. We spoke about it at 2 council meetings ago. We all agreed on it. Sent it to Miss Sandy, had it drawn up, sent it to the parish attorney who reviewed it. Whereas the Livingston Parish Council adopted resolution on March forming the Master Plan Review Committee, that's why all this is done. And just to real quick let you know that the requirements shall only apply to the building line setback of buildings and other structures that are adjacent to state and federal roads and highways. Interstate I-12 will not be included in this provision. No permanent structure shall be located within the building line setbacks other than signs for a business or developments that do not block visibility. Building line setbacks may also be used for parking, underground utilities, drainage, green areas, and landscaping, and access. Building line setbacks shall apply to duplexes, row houses, townhomes, garden homes, mobile parks, all commercial developments, unclassified residential and commercial developments, mixed-use residential and commercial properties, planned downtown developments, small neighborhoods and businesses, all multifamily developments, subdivisions with improvements, subdivisions without improvements, minor subdivisions, and all single-family residents. All other commercial and non-commercial projects such as sewer lift stations, electrical substations, water wells, and tanks. And it goes on and lists a few other things, and there's a copy if you have any interest, but I think we've decided as an ordinance committee that this is a very good ordinance. And since we're just basically tonight, it's also, I think it's on the agenda for the council, isn't it? So we'll bring this up again tonight for introduction at the parish council meeting. But if you have anything that you completely opposed to this, now would be the time to talk about this ordinance, or we'll put this one and then go to the next one about the next ordinance. But if there's no one here to speak for or against this ordinance, we'll just close this down. Ms. Gerald, did you have something to say?
Can I say a few things?
Sure, come on up. State your name if you don't mind. And
Cover what you covered. And what brought this about was, we had been meeting with anybody and everybody, state representatives, state senators, and we even had a meeting with Secretary Sean Wilson of DOTD with Rogers Pope and Tommy Morton. And Secretary Sean Wilson said in the meeting they had some problems in St. Tammany Parish and too many buildings next to the road. He asked us to stop doing that in Livingston Parish. So that's what this is about. And to stop building so close to the highways and quit buying buildings and start building roads is what he's saying. So we took this ordinance and kind of run with it based upon what the state had done on Juban Road and some of it on Florida Boulevard and Juban widening where the roundabout's going, and they took 30 feet. And that's how that came about, okay? And I've done a study between John Springs past Walker Landfill, about 35 businesses that were within that 30 feet. And about 90% of them were storefront facing the highway. So and it's more than that, really. I missed some.
right.
But that's what it's about.
Yeah, sure.
And anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Gerald. And it was a good ordinance. I mean, it's setback, and then it encourages people to actually move their parking in the front door, not facing the highway. So it's got a bunch of good things in there. And so I would make a motion to send it to the parish council, but we don't, it's already on the agenda. So we're just going to close that item.
I just want to say one thing.
Sure. Turn your mic on. You know, somebody wants to hear you.
Thanks for that advice. Okay, so I just wanted to say thanks to Mr. Gerald Burns and the Master Plan Review Committee for working hard to come up with good cost-beneficial ways to improve the infrastructure in Livingston Parish. They're doing an exceptional job of prioritizing roads and reaching out to representatives and state officials to follow through with that game plan. And that's really, really, really very, very, very important for future growth of Livingston Parish. I'd like to say I thank them for that. And I thank that committee and Mr. Gerald for putting this ordinance together. I think it's a well-written ordinance. I think it's necessary. We've talked about it for the last 4 to 6 weeks. And I think that is a way for all of us, developers, council members, just people of Livingston Parish, to promote good growth. And it's a way of, a cost-effective way of widening some of the state and federal highways that's necessary so that, infrastructure is where it needs to be when we go to develop Livingston Parish. I just have one really quick question, and I just wanted to make sure that it was clear. And I'm basically asking Mr. Gerald or maybe Mr. Sam or some of maybe these engineers within the room here. So we're talking about the building lines and the setbacks, right? Off of federal and state road. I want to make sure that it's clear that we're not talking about the building lines for residential and commercial property. Basically, this ordinance is for the setback off of
The road.
state or federal road, and it's very clear to everyone that this does not change the building lines or setbacks, or maybe you can explain to me if it does, between
Properties,
the
adjacent
structures,
properties.
right, to adjacent structure, or maybe there's a adjacent property behind the commercial development or to the side of the development that, you know, we have the existing setbacks in the building lines.
Well, this
and
is
that's not gonna change.
This is
right?
Shane.
The current way that this document is written, if adopted, you know, that no one is confused on that.
The
This is
parish,
strictly the front
The parish
setback
now,
facing the road.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
through, I'm sorry. The parish now has a building line ordinance, 125.23, and it's specific to subdivisions with improvements, without improvements, and minor resubs, okay? But basically, the developers now, and the engineers, and the planning department uses this document, and it talks about in between houses, 6 or 7 foot, according to how big the lots are, okay? 20 foot rear and 25 on the front, but we're talking about subdivision streets. We're not talking about federal, we're not talking about state highways, okay? And they've been using this for many, many years, and that's all they got to use. So, and they've been doing a good job, but it doesn't apply to things on federal and state highways. To give you an example, across on Florida Boulevard, across from Gator Millworks, there's 2 houses in a subdivision there that's approximately 7 foot off of Florida Boulevard using this ordinance, okay? So if the state, and we're begging the state to widen Florida Boulevard, state comes in, they gotta buy them 2 houses, you know, 275,000 a lick, give or take. $550,000, and this ordinance that we're introducing in the future would prohibit any houses, side or commercial, side facing the federal state highway. This ordinance that we're introducing would say it has to be 30 feet instead of 6 or 7 feet.
That's really what my question is.
Yeah.
Okay, so this document, the way it's currently written, is talking about the side building line, if the side building line faces
The state highway.
or federal
State or
highway,
federal-
and it's
Florida Boulevard
there's
is on
no,
federal highway.
there's
That's
no
Highway 19.
confusion about that. So if you built, say your front parking lot was, faced the state highway, and the document here says that you need to be 55 foot off, right? And
That's
so
written.
that
Yeah.
is not going to affect the building line on the side if there's an adjacent property on the side of that property,
No, that's
correct?
not what we're
So the
talking
way
about.
this is written,
Only if the building line, if you go to the building line definition, it is any part of a structure that adjoins public highway, public road. That's what the building line is, okay? And that's how they use it here, but this is internal to a subdivision, okay? And it's not appropriate for what we're building on federal and state highways.
All right,
okay, so we all agree on that, right?
I think that was my understanding. And to clarify that, sometimes being in politics and in the legislative branch for years, I've learned that a law will be passed, years will go by, and then someone will find the law when they're looking at something and say, well, you can't do that because of this. Well, when the law was originally adopted, there was intent for that law. And sometimes this could be misconstrued, but what Gerald and Miss Sandy did, very good, the ordinance goes into a lot of definition as whereas we have a problem with having to purchase, and whereas the state costs more money to have to buy a building, and it details the intent of this ordinance. It has nothing to do with, so by putting that in the ordinance, I think it makes it even more clear to address the problem that you're talking about, Shane, that the neighbors beside and behind, this does not apply to them. It applies to your building from the state. So I think the ordinance was well-written, and the whereases cover those things to show the intent of the ordinance. No one else has anything to say for that. The next item on the agenda is an item that Mr. Gary Talbert brought up. Mr. Gerald?
The other ordinance, dot 34 on the aprons, turnaround aprons, it's part of, it's not part of that ordinance, but it's separate.
I thought it was part of, it looks like to
It's
me
in the
it's part
same
of.
sheet of paper, but it's separate ordinance.
It's just adding 2 sections in one ordinance.
Is that on this same?
It's on
It's on the same, it's just next in line, it's 125.34.
Well, we talked about that at the last meeting with the T turnarounds,
Well, yeah, yeah.
and we agreed on it. It was just to put that in a different section. I think is what we all agreed on. Okay. And the next item on the agenda is at the ordinance committee meeting a month ago, I believe it was, a month ago, or 2 weeks ago, Mr. Talbert had brought up an ordinance, and I wish he was here tonight to speak for it or against it. He will be for the parish council meeting coming up, I feel pretty certain. I just had some questions about it, but I don't guess there's anyone here to answer questions. Ms. Morgan, or do you know anything about this ordinance that Mr. Talbert's presented?
I've seen it, but
Do you have any thoughts on it?
Hey, that's what this meeting's about. Let's talk through this to see if this is good government or bad government.
Mr. Billy?
Just a question, are we talking about the full ordinance or a specific part? And then in the agenda it says Fonzie, are you talking about the whole ordinance and everything?
Well, I guess what it is, he introduced, or he brought to the ordinance committee meeting, the whole ordinance, but he had some things scratched out and then added in. They were scratching out different, the two things that I took away from it, and I was kind of hoping maybe that's him. That's not him. Two things that he put on there was, that I caught was, one, we're going to, from what I'm understanding, he wants to do away with 25 and 50-year flood plan and make everything 100. Is that correct, Morgan? He said he spoke with you on that.
yes, that is my understanding. He was taking out, he wanted to decrease 50% in 100 years.
So every subdivision would be a 100-year drainage stormwater plan, and no more 50s and 25s. Is that correct?
They wouldn't analyze the rest, but they'd have to decrease in 100 years, 50%. That's what I was told.
I guess anyway, that's one thing that I saw in his ordinance, and the next thing was that I understand he was requesting that every subdivision have to get a Fonzie. Is that correct? Do you know about that?
Yes, he added that in there.
So every subdivision will have to get a Fonzie. And it kind of caught me by surprise, so I was able to do a little research. And Mr. Sam, you're probably the Fonzie expert, huh?
Certainly.
Do you want to talk about?
Well, we're kind of confused on maybe the intent of this thing. You know, Fonzie's a big, broad area. And I think in Gary's mind, I think he's more concerned in the off-road drainage with this environmental. He's going to try to tie the Fonzie into the environmental. And I'm, by no means speaking on his behalf, because I haven't really sat down and talked to him, other than, small amount. And I think he's more concerned in off-road drainage and trying to tie this Fonzie into that. Because a lot of these folks are getting, I guess, I don't want to say punished, but they're getting more.
You want to come to the mic? I mean, I know you, I can, but the TV and,
Yeah, I've got a question too.
and I'm sure other people have questions. You've been doing this a long
I
time.
think Gary's intent is the off-road drainage. And when he mentions this Fonzie, I don't know if this Fonzie should tie into something like that, because we do have our drainage impact studies. But I don't know if we go far enough with the drainage work when we develop these subdivisions. I can't answer that. That would have to be an engineering question. Do we go far enough out to maybe suffice this neighbor right here 5 miles down.
Right. So let me ask you this. Eliminating the 25 and the 50-year plan and doing everything 100, I mean, is,
I think that's gonna be a considerable change for the best.
and that would be strictly dealing with drainage, is
That's
what
correct.
that would
That's
fix the
correct.
drainage
But
problem.
when you say Fonzie, I mean,
Yeah,
I think Morgan and them, and she can probably tell you a little bit more about that. We dealt with a little of that on the Cook Road extension because it was
HUD money or federal money.
federal money. So it was
Yeah.
a requirement.
Right, right.
And we've been fooling with Cook Road since I came aboard in 2006.
I know, and that's
So,
when
I
you,
mean, it's not an easy challenge.
yeah,
It's a lot of, that the developers have to, I mean, from what I understand, and correct me, Morgan, if I'm wrong, I mean, these guys has got to go out before the preliminaries ever presented and get these.
finding of no significant increase is what it,
Right.
yeah.
So, I mean, and I'm just telling you on stuff that we look at every day.
Right.
A lot of these people don't buy these developments until after it's somewhat approved.
Sure,
Now, that doesn't help the neighbors, so, I don't have a dog in the hunt, I'm just explaining
Sure.
the pro and the con to this thing.
right,
But I think it's gonna be a pretty entailed,
right.
I feel that Mr. Gary is trying to, he wants better drainage, that's what the parish,
Right.
the people expect, I mean.
And I think everybody
There's
wants that.
nothing wrong with that, there's
Well-
nothing wrong with that.
Okay, let me ask you a question, and real quick, Shane. And if you don't know, maybe someone else does, but I never really was familiar with what a Fonzie was until the last meeting, and so I did a little bit of research, and like you said, I think it's when HUD or federal funds, money is available, they require, when federal money goes to building airports, coastal restoration projects, major infrastructure used from federal funding, that they require a Fonzie. And if I'm not mistaken, a Fonzie requires people to do a clean air evaluation,
It's a lot entailed.
coastal management, and check if there's toxic substances, check for endangered species, so you'd have to call for
Absolutely.
wildlife fisheries and check for turtles and frogs, any kind of explosive, floodplain management, historic preservation, because there might be an Indian burial ground somewhere, and, you got to get the historical preservation committee to sign off on that.
I think it just needs to be kind of defined a little bit.
And and that's, so.
Especially
yeah.
for us.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
As a.
Now, if anyone else has any more information on Fonzie, I mean, I'm asking you to give me that information, but
We get calls on, interpretations on these resubs.
yeah.
I mean, because we have,
Sure,
different personalities, different questions, and it's just, I don't know that much about it.
Okay.
I don't know.
Sam, I appreciate you coming up, and Shane, did you have a question real quick?
I got a question you may or may not be able to answer. So, and I guess we need to get with Gary and get some clarification, but when it says, I mean, it defines Fonzie, and it's a federal document, blah, 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 and then in the ordinance, it says accompanied by Fonzie. So what does that mean exactly, accompanied by Fonzie?
I guess all applications would have to have a Fonzie before they can be approved to be subdivided?
Accompanied by Fonzie, I mean, I don't know.
Morgan, you don't have
What-
any?
What does that specifically mean?
So I can't tell you what it specifically means. When he defines the Fonzie, because I'm looking at it. When they wrote this, I'm Mr. Gary Tower.
Okay.
Right. So when they define that Fonzie, I don't think they meant all the documents that are in what we consider a Fonzie when we think of that, like these federal projects, it's a lot. And so when he says accompanied by a Fonzie, I think he's saying that with each of these, like the final plat won't be able to be signed until they give you a Fonzie. So what I know of a Fonzie, that would go at the preliminary stage though. So you would have already done that way before you get to final plat stage. But the accompanied by, what he's saying is he wants them to present a Fonzie at that stage, which I believe what he put in the ordinance he's written is at the final plat stages.
Well, it talks about in a minor subdivision and in all types of subdivision, it being accompanied
Yes.
by. I don't know, I'm just trying to envision how that process would work. Just like I say, we probably need to talk to somebody
Yeah, I
that
think we
knows.
need some more information on it,
Yeah.
but it sounds like even looking at their definition of a Fonzie, he was thinking this would be like one document saying that there's no significant impact, and I guess that would come from an engineer. Why the agency has concluded there's no significant environmental impacts. That's different than what you would look up and see as a Fonzie. That's not exactly what we interpret, like what the document you've got, that is what a Fonzie is typically when you get federal funds and everything. I don't think that's exactly what he meant when he put Fonzie in this document.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Juno, did you want
Yeah, I was just curious, what's the difference between Fonzie and the Phase 1
to,
environment?
do me a favor, come to the microphone if you would, and state your name, address, and where you live, or state name and address, and if you
Yeah,
don't.
Mike Juno, 23945, Highway 1032. And you mentioned all the stuff you mentioned on the Fonzie. I never heard the term Fonzie either. And been developing 25 years, I did. But everything you mentioned is in a Phase 1 environmental, at least a survey, identifies if there is a potential for any of that. So what's the difference?
I'm not sure either.
I assume we require some kind of a Phase 1 environmental
Yeah.
on most developments. I mean, I
Right.
know banks require it, I know that. You ain't gonna get a loan without it.
Right.
So I don't know what the difference is.
Well, we'll find that out.
I guess we'll talk about it in the council meeting, but this probably
The
should
council
be.
meeting come up, I'm sure, because it's on the agenda.
Yeah.
This item is on the agenda for the parish council meeting, and Mr. Talbert, who sponsored this ordinance, will be here, I'm sure, to address any questions that
I
you might
got
have.
one more question.
Billy, did you have a question real quick, Shane? I'm not putting you
No,
off, it's
go
just
ahead.
Specifically about the Fonzie, Billy Taylor, Michael Taylor. I was at the last meeting too, and I kind of agree with Morgan. I heard what Mr. Gary was saying, and from what he was verbally saying was, he basically wanted to make sure that there was no negative impacts about drainage. And at the last meeting, I'd never heard of that, and I didn't have time to look it up for the meeting, so I didn't ask any
Right.
questions. But after I asked him, I said, is there like a sample document that you're looking for that you can provide us to review? He said, just look it up. So I did, but everything I found was the federal funding and environmental assessment, and even on the definition, it says no significant environmental impacts. So I think just talking to him, he meant drainage impacts and not, so I think if we start talking about environmental, that could change a whole lot of things. I have some clients that read through it and they have some concerns too, just, even though we might be talking about drainage, well, if there's a conflict down the road with a neighbor and you get in court, and then a judge looks up a Fonzie.
And he
it's a
sees that.
2,000-page document.
Right.
And you're saying you gave him a doc. So anyway, I think there's some other issues that could arise from that. But I think as far as, hey, do we want to protect drainage and make sure that it's done right? And is there something we can look at or provide? I think
Right.
everybody's on that page to do that. And we kind of already do that in our drainage impact studies.
Right.
Anyway, give that statement that we're not, significantly impacting the.
And I
areas.
think he addressed the drainage specifically when he talked about changing the 25 and 50 to 100 year. That would be a
Well,
major,
that's a different subject
I
as
mean,
well.
yeah.
So he did address it, and he addressed it multiple ways, and
I can see that. That makes sense. I just didn't
Yeah.
understand the rest of it.
So I just think everybody we have an idea of what he means by Fonzie, and we're okay with that. It's just I don't think we want to use that term because it's got a lot of other implications.
Other things
That would be
tied
my
to
only
it.
comment.
Okay.
Maybe a couple of people might want to say something.
All right. Mr.
Just appreciate
Mack?
that. Yeah, let me see. I just want to ask a couple questions. Appreciate that clarification. I think you're right. I think that his intent is good and that he wants to put something in place that when we approve any development, that it doesn't have a negative impact when it comes to drainage. And so drainage is very important. So we'll have to wait and get clarification on that before we move forward, I guess, or talk about it in the council meeting. But the other question I had is that it looks like to me that we're going to delete. Is there any clarification? Does anybody have, when it comes to open ditch in a subdivision, you want to come talk about that? I mean, is the plan to totally delete that allowed drainage plan? Is that the plan?
So I can't tell you if that's the plan, but just me reading it, that was a question I had written down to ask for clarification. I know, most of the way the ordinance is written, if you have 15 lots or more, you have to have curb and gutter unless there's a certain criteria as far as your lot size, or if you do a large lot subdivision. So I think that could create some issues if you take that out, that you would be leaving those type of developments out. So we may still need to leave it
We're
in.
going to need to get clarification on that too.
Okay, and again, that leads me really clear what the intent of the law is, instead of just using the word Fonzie. And years later, somebody goes to subdivide their acre and a half that they've owned and want to sell it to their kids or give it to their children, then somebody's going to pull up the law and see the word Fonzie and say, oh, well, you got to go get an environmental impact, and you've been living on that land for 100 years. So I think it brings back to the point that it's important when you make these laws, you make it very clear what the intent was and what you meant. So just the ordinance that we have right now, I don't see where I think we need to clarify before we adopt anything on that. And, Mr. Kinchin, did you have something you want to say? Come state your name and address, please.
Jim Kinchin, 12990 Sutcliffe Drive, Walker. And what you're saying there about the intent of an ordinance, I think it's very appropriate that even here in this discussion tonight, nobody really knows what a Fonzie is. And so to throw the wording that it must include a Fonzie, and nobody knows what it is exactly by definition, because I've researched it a little bit, and everything I find it must be some federal dollars, or they must be federal oversight in the project that's going on. And somebody subdividing a couple of acres of property to develop a few lots, there's no federal dollars involved. There's no federal oversight. There's no federal permitting. And that's what I read as in the definition of a Fonzie that I can find. And when it comes back to the intent, like you said, some years down the road, somebody gets in front of a judge.
He don't know the
judge is going to
intent.
say,
Yeah.
you've got to have a Fonzie. And this is what I think a Fonzie is. It's a 2,000-page document that's got DEQ and EPA and every other federal agency has got to sign off on that there is no significant impact. Where I think what we're looking for in developing property and subdividing property and improving property, when you do a drainage impact study, and I've discussed this with some of the engineers, that when you do a proper drainage impact study and the developer properly carries out the plans of that impact study and develops it the way it should be, then there is no significant off-site impact for flooding or drainage. And now, if you want to look 5 miles down the road, we need to look at doing some different type of drainage impact study. But let's don't throw some obscure, nobody knows what it means here in Livingston Parish, Fonzie acronym into an ordinance and get ourselves in a world of trouble. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mack, did you have something else? No? You agree with that? Okay, well, look, this is going to be brought up again tonight at 6:30 when we have a Livingston Parish Council meeting, and it's going to, Mr. Talbert's got it on the agenda, so maybe he can answer some more of those questions.
There's another part of that ordinance proposed.
You want to come on up to the mic?
Yes, sir. Part of that ordinance proposal was a Fonzie. The second part was changing the drainage requirements. And my name's Lee Foster, developer. And I'm in agreement to improve drainage in areas. There's definitely something needs to be done to how it gets conveyed to the channels to go downstream. I think when it was presented as a 100-year storm, which is typically how most of the other surrounding areas are designed, but it was proposed to be a 50% reduction. There's not any other areas that have a 50% reduction in this whole area. So there's 10% reductions in Tangi, Ascension, 25% St. Tammany. But I think it needs to be looked at it not from just a total reduction, is how do we utilize these detention ponds that we're building to retain it longer. So right now, we have to meet the ordinance on the books, which means pre versus post. But why can't outfalls be designed where the features that we're building retain it longer, reduce the impacts downstream, and we meter out at a later date? So the coefficient of time changes. So releasing it pre and post ponds longer for 48. That's not a 50% reduction. 50% reduction, effectively, you kill the development industry. There's no areas that have that. So there's other ways to get there, and I'm from the development community that say, hey, we can still achieve it to improve it by changing it, but we have to look at how it's calculated and how it's metered to get those reductions.
I see what you're
So
saying.
as a development community, we can do that, but not at a 100-year and a 50% reduction. All that does is make bigger ponds with the same size outfall pipe, so water still discharges at the same rate.
Well, fortunately, the gentleman who introduced this ordinance just walked in, Mr. Gary Talbot. Mr. Talbot, we've got a few questions, from different people. I'm hoping you can maybe enlighten us and give us some information on some of the, turn your mic on there, Gary, or push the mic down all the way down into the base.
Okay, so what are some of the concerns, I guess, is?
They had some concerns on Fonzie. My question was more than drainage. I'm in agreement that to improve the studies to 100-year, that's improving the drainage and the overall ordinance. But the 50% reduction is significantly higher than all the surrounding areas.
Well, didn't St. Tammany 75?
25.
Huh?
25.
25, and Iberville's, 500 retain and release at 10?
On certain areas of the parish, not the whole parish.
And
Tangia is 10, Ascension is 10. So to me, there is a reduction that the community can do at 100-year and retain more and improve what we currently have on the books. But I also think we need to take one step forward to look at the methodology of how we discharge it and retain it in these ponds longer and discharge it out after the rain event. And I'm not an engineer, Billy does that for me, but effectively, there's ways that we can improve the drainage and work towards the same effort, but a 50% reduction, I think, is a little bit out of line with what the goals would be. Because it keeps the same outfall structures and same components in place, and to me, you don't get as big of an improvement as retaining it longer on site.
Mr. Mack?
I just want to say I appreciate you for coming to the meeting and basically communicating what you're communicating. It sounds logical. I guess the question is, to the engineers that deal with this on a daily basis, how do you go about moving forward with this type of requirement? Is this possible, what he's saying? It sounds like that it would be logical, and it sounds like that it would probably be a better option.
So it's a difficult thing to explain. So let's just take any engineering out of it. I'm not engineer talking. I'm just me and you talking in layman's terms here.
I may be able to understand you now.
Me and you neighbors, and we're talking about these developers, I wish they would do this. So I've been talking to some developers, and we got to looking back, say 10 years ago, we might design by, say, a 10-year storm or maybe something even less. And we got to looking at our outfall pipes on all of our ponds, and they may be like, just in one scenario, you may have an 18-inch pipe, one 18-inch pipe. Years go by, we making our design storms a little tougher, more stringent, and trying to design by a higher storm, which we think is a good thing. But in doing so, you got more water coming through your ponds based off your calculations that you have to handle, and you have to detain it pre and post. So in the end, you end up with bigger outfall pipes. So just in layman's terms, if you had the same calculations for a 10-year or 100-year, and you had one pipe or you had two pipes, like one 18-inch or three 30-inch, which one do you think's letting more water out? So that's what we started talking about. And I've had a couple of developments in other areas I've done where we've tried a few things. Instead of just having two pipes at the static water surface and a weir, we may have, say, a 15-inch pipe down low. It raises up to another level, and then you may have two 24 inches. And then when it gets a little bit higher, you may have bigger pipes. So when it gets to this big storm and you're up here, that water's going to get out of there, not over top. But as it gets down here, well, then it slows down, right? Well, then when it gets past the 224 inches and down to the 115, then it lets out even slower. So I think that's what Mr. Foster's trying to say. If we could start looking at that, we would be able to meter the release of the water a little better at a longer period of time, and this would be released maybe after some of the main rains come through. But we've been talking about it. It's going to take a little time, and it's hard to quantify the outcome that we're trying to find here and put it in writing. But I think we have some thoughts along the same lines, and that's what we're looking at. So I think that's what he mentioned. I don't have any engineering data on that. Like I said, we've done it in a couple other places. And I'm gonna have to look at different type storms and see if we can get some data on that for you. But I think that's kind of where he's going. Hey, yeah, let's do a reduction. Maybe not 50%. Maybe something a little smaller to start with, because we think we do need to do something. But maybe start there, and then let's look at how we can meter these a little bit better.
Okay, so Billy, so let's talk about the Fonzie thing. So, there are a bunch of different Fonzies, right? I mean, FEMA, if you look at, there's tons of different definitions. So I talked to Chad yesterday. Chad and I had a conversation. He wanted to know what the intent of the deal was. Why did I want, so I just told him, I said, we divide, engineers will design a subdivision based on what the ordinance says, right? And then when the subdivision, the design is done, we've designed it according to the ordinance, but what we don't look at is how it works. You know what I'm talking about? There's a particular commercial development in Watson that butts up against another piece of property. One corner of it sheeted the other direction. Everything else on the property sheeted to the neighbor. And there's probably 900 linear feet between the neighbor and them that all that water sheeted across. And then the development was designed at a 100-year storm in an effort to not have to look downstream. And they build this retention pond. They got a 36-inch outfall into this ditch. The ditch that it drains into is not capable of having a 36-inch culvert pushed in it. And the first culvert that you reach in that ditch is 12. So it's like a 12, an 18. So the engineer, I'm like, this isn't gonna work. And the engineer said, well, we designed it according to the ordinance. So the purpose of the Fonzie was to say, have somebody look at it and say, okay, you've designed this development according to the ordinance. However, it doesn't work. It's gonna negatively impact the neighbor. Because there's no way that a 36-inch culvert can drain into a ditch that's not even capable of holding a 36-inch culvert. You follow what I'm saying? So Chad assured me that there were other ways to combat that we, probably maybe need to look at, if we want to put a Fonzie, define what we're expecting out of it. So initially, we're going to just pull that part out.
Which part? Which part?
The Fonzie. Pull it completely out of the ordinance. Anywhere that refers to a Fonzie, we're going to remove in this particular ordinance.
That we're planning to introduce later.
That's planning to introduce.
And we spoke about that. A few people spoke before you got here, and I made the comment that I was at the last meeting, and I thought that's what your intent was more about drainage. I think some of the concerns that have been passed on to me from other people was just the term Fonzie.
Well, you look at what FEMA requires. They don't. They're not looking at. They've got different requirements on what it is, and depending on what organization's funding it, there's different responsibilities. So, Fonzie is a broad term that can be defined by. We could say that we're interested in how the impact of drainage is on the neighbor, and verifying that the information put forth in the drainage impact study is accurate. And we could define 3 or 4 things. We're not prepared to do that tonight, so we're going to remove that part of it, and we'll address that later. I got one question for you. If I lived in Mr. McMorris's district, as an example, and I took a little water in 2016, which is an unusual rain event, but on a typical rain event that happens now, I get water in my yard. You know what I'm saying? The ditches in the street fill up, I get water in my yard. And there is a proposed 100 or 1,000 lot development next to me, it's 350 acres. Am I better served living next door to that development under the current ordinance that we have or this new ordinance? Where am I most protected?
Definitely on a new ordinance.
So ultimately, there's a lot of discussion about the new and old, about, what can be done, what can't be done. The citizens of our parish are better served under this new ordinance. So
I wanted to bring up one more thing too, and I'm just trying to look down the road. I know a lot of times, and I tell everybody this, y'all work on a lot of things and try to make a lot of improvements, but sometimes when you write an ordinance, we've seen it in the past, you may have an unintended consequence. So I'm just trying to look at some of those. One thing that I've kind of saw in other places too, I wanted to mention to you guys and just consider it, is maybe looking at an acreage size on this. And where I'm going with it is, I know there's a lot of properties along, say, Highway 16 or 190 that are 1 acre. If they have to do a 50% reduction, they're probably looking at using up a whole lot more of their land, which is very valuable, or doing a super expensive subsurface detention type thing. So I know a couple places they may say, hey, anything over 2 acres has to follow this. So that's just something I'd like to ask you to consider. It's been brought up to my attention, that pass on to you guys. I don't have the answers.
And Billy, if you remember, the last time we modified this ordinance, there was discussion of how, we defined what study was utilized. There was concern that small acreage lots might be impacted. And we talked about that and talked about the possibility of revisiting it depending upon what happened. And that was 4 years ago?
It's been a couple of years.
Yeah, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, there's been no impact to small acreage.
We did address it in that instance. The way we changed, we allow for different calculations for smaller stuff. So anyway, I just was mentioning.
I understand, and look, I'm not. I know that this thing is going to require, but so my question is, if we're looking for a 50% reduction, if you go to build a subdivision and there's not a water main there that's significant water, right? Then developer will put a water in, right? Won't he? If DOT or the parish says you need a turn lane, nobody has a problem with putting a turn lane in. We'll put a lift station in and run a force main wherever we need to go to tie into the sewer. But nobody wants to improve the drainage.
Yeah. Well,
So my question is I've seen, we're supposed to be net zero, right? Yet we build a subdivision next to some place and it's supposed to be net zero, but the consequences are that the neighbor is always impacted. So why, if we're net zero, are we negatively impacting the neighbor? Is it because we're draining into facilities that aren't capable of carrying the water? And so we need to reduce the outfall? So we're talking about retaining water longer. We've said, let's look at that. So if we ask for a 50% reduction, and we're going to make you retain 100 year, and we're looking for a 50% reduction, then we're going to hold water longer, right? Isn't that a consequence of what we're going to do? We're going to hold water longer, and we're going to design it in such a manner that you can only reduce it you only can release it a 50% reduction, right?
I got you. Well, calculation wise, I agree. I can't say that every development negatively impacts the neighbor. I'll say this, everybody I've talked to, all the developers that are talking about this, and nobody I've talked to says, hey, we want to make drainage worse. They all say, hey, we do want to make drainage better. We want to be a part of the conversation, and we want to talk about it and try to work together with you. So I think that's why a lot of people are here to talk with you about that. And you guys are going to make the ultimate decision.
I got just a quick question, just a clarification. It looks like to me that the current ordinance calls for a 50% reduction for a 100-year storm, I guess, detention, retention pond, whatever. That's what it says right here. It's not in red.
This is the proposed one, huh?
Yeah, it's not in red.
What are you talking about? On which line?
It's, I don't know, J1, where it says detention basin. It is highlighted in yellow, but it's not red.
No, but I think the reds are strikeouts. The reds
Okay,
are when
so
we're
the yellows, where
the yellows are the new words and the reds are the strikeouts of the old ordinance.
Okay, so the question I have is, the gentleman earlier that designs developments stated that it's impossible to get a 50% reduction. Is that true?
I mean,
I don't think it's the word impossible. It's possible. I think what you're going to find is, like Mr. Gary's saying, your ponds are just going to be a lot bigger, and maybe I think, and he could speak. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I'm talking about maybe for a financial thing, the numbers might not work out to where it would be feasible. Maybe the word he might have been using. But,
Okay. Appreciate that.
I mean, so I don't think that anything that we've put in here is not achievable.
Okay.
Did you have something?
I mean, I think everything's achievable. And look, you know, there was discussion, you know, typically right now we're designing inside the development for a 10-year event. And then we're retaining at 25 and releasing it at 10. Am I right, Morgan?
I think you just made him agree with 25 year.
We do what?
25 year, pre-post, so there was no decrease and no increase.
Right. So, but in essence, we're designing inside for a 10.
Yes, which would mean your road might flood a little bit more for a
So when we go to 100, that's why we looked at a 25-year.
To 100. Let him, he's got a
Go
question here. I think it,
Just clarification, I'm in favor of going to 100. That's an improvement. I'm in favor of decreasing if you decrease to your 20%. But if you take let's say you take a 20% decrease, and you take the same methodology as currently done, you make the pond bigger, your outfall pipe the same, your scenario in Watson happens again. That's what I don't want to have. So when you force 50%, you force the same thought process. Because, I mean, like I said, I'm not an engineer, but if you take the model, less water comes out of a smaller pipe, if it retains longer, and then you let it out as the storms build up. So if you just change to 100-year and do a 50% reduction, you're going to get bigger ponds with the same size outfall pipes. They'll be 50% less. You'll go from a 36 to a 24. So what happens is the methodology, the engineering behind it doesn't change, just the application of the piece of property does. But if you take it and say, let's go to 100, I'm in favor of that. That's a benefit. Take it to say, you know what, let's go to right now it's 25 pre-imposed. Let's go to a 10% reduction at the 10-year, which is very common in some areas. Well, that requires, it's a higher storm we're designing to, that's 100. We're releasing at a lower storm, which is a 10, which it retains more, and your pipes are smaller. That's a benefit. If you go to a 50-year, all those options that we have to choose from are off the table. We just make bigger ponds with the same size pipes. A little bit different, a little smaller, but that thought methodology doesn't change, so your improvement of what you're looking for isn't as great as it could be. That's my thing. Going to 100 and going to a 10 or 20% reduction is a benefit with the outfall rate being at a lower rate, because your ponds can still handle it. Because if you look at those ponds, I'm a developer, I watch these ponds, I'm in developments all the time. Those ponds are utilized during heavy rain events and heavy storms. So why can't they be utilized more on a 10, 15-year storm and get released downstream at a later time to help the community? So that's the part where the 50% doesn't coincide with it.
thank you very much.
Appreciate that.
So basically we're designing for a 100-year the way this ordinance is written, and we're designing to retain for 100 years. And we're looking for a 50% reduction. So we're looking for a 50% reduction on the current numbers, right?
Yes.
So
100 year.
what?
On 100 years, that's what was presented to us. So they would look at the 100-year storm and the
what Mr. Foster's talking about is maybe going to a 10 or 20% reduction on a 10-year event. So we would look at the sheet on a 10-year, whatever the number, whatever the gallons per hour, a minute, whatever was leaving the property now, we're looking for a 20% reduction on that number, or 10% reduction on that number. We're gonna design to 100-year. So we're gonna retain water for 100-year, and then we're gonna release it at a reduction of the 10-year number?
I think that's what he was saying, yes.
Yeah, so right now, the pre and post is 25 years, so you reduce that to 10, and then you'll have a percentage.
Mr. Talbot, for restraint of time, I mean, I believe we've covered a lot of things. I just want to bring us to a head here. It sounds like there's still some changes that you want to do. You want to pull out the Fonzie, and I guess what I'm asking is, how about we request that you go back and redo this same ordinance, pulling the word Fonzie out, clarifying the drainage issues that you think are going to improve and make drainage better for this parish, and kind of reword it and put it in the section that it goes, if you don't mind, and let's pick this back up at another council meeting so we can have more of a finalized draft instead of trying to just come to something now. I'd like to see this committee, at least, oh, by the way, we now have, real quick, I'd like to ask Mr. Jeff.
We will make that clarified tonight.
Well, is Mr. Talbot officially
You
on?
can officially vote.
So he's not on the ordinance?
We don't actually have a quorum.
Okay.
We have to announce it.
So Scooter Keene is,
Scooter King is, he can come up there. and-
Scooter, would you be okay with voting tonight to ask?
I'm sorry, guys, I just.
Well, that's okay. Would you be okay tonight to
Does
vote?
that sound right, Sandy?
Make sure your mic's on, Scooter.
Huh?
Make sure your mic is on.
I do own a business, and that's why I would.
And would you be okay with getting a motion and second
Is that what you wanna
to ask Mr. Tower to redraw this ordinance
Get it all straight.
and bring it back to
Yeah, I'll
the
make a motion to defer until the next ordinance.
the next ordinance committee, so we can get a more of a final version of what this is.
Yeah, I agree, yeah,
I
that's probably the right
second to
thing.
defer and get some clarification to.
Okay, well, we have a motion by Mr. King, second by Mr. Talbot, and we'll have a
No,
better
I missed
draft at the next
I
one. I'm sorry, motion by Mr. King, second by Mr. Mack, to have another draft at the next ordinance committee meeting. And so, please, we value your input. Mr. Foster, thank you so much for what you had to say. I know Mr. Kinchin left, and Mr. Juneau, thank you so much for talking and giving us some information. Sam, as always, you bring lots of wisdom whenever you stand up and speak. Call for the vote, Ms. Sandy?
Mr. Wascom?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
All right, motion carries. That was the last two ordinance committee meetings. The next one was an address clarification that roads are connected, not necessarily subdivisions. Sandy, can you explain that to me, or who put that on here, or was that just,
That was something that y'all had discussed at the last council meeting, and y'all.
I think Tracy, well, let's defer, we'll defer that till he gets back. And with no other information, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that
By Mr. Mack, second by Mr. King, all in favor? Aye. Motion carries.